From the characters we see on screen to the stories we hear, stereotypes and tropes shape and are shaped by the way we understand the world around us. Tropes are recurring themes, plot devices, or character types that act as narrative shortcuts, helping audiences quickly understand a story or character. While they are not inherently negative, overuse can make them feel predictable or cliched. Stereotypes, however, are oversimplified and generalized ideas about a group of people based on characteristics like race, gender, or ethnicity. These familiar patterns in media can both reflect and reinforce societal beliefs, often narrowing our perceptions of identity, culture, and individuality. The sexualized depiction of young women and girls in media. The sexualized depiction of young women and girls in media refers to the representation of girls, often adolescents or preteens, as sexually mature or sexually available, despite their actual age. This representation blends the innocence of youth with adult-like sexual appeal, often creating a narrative where young women are portrayed as both childlike and sexually alluring at the same time. The emphasis on sexualized innocence distorts the natural boundaries between childhood and adulthood, framing young girls as objects of desire, creating an environment in which their sexualization is not only normalized, but often idealized. Youth, especially female youth, is frequently idealized and associated with innocence, purity, and untapped potential, and the desire of men to be the first to experience a woman's intimacy is often tied to the appeal of untouched virginity. For many men, there is a deep-seated desire to take a woman's innocence, to be the one who introduces her to certain experiences, marking themselves as the first to possess her in that way. This desire is rooted in the notion of control and ownership, where being a woman's first gives a sense of accomplishment or validation as if they have claimed a part of her identity that is only theirs to experience. In the case of young girls, this is particularly pronounced, as they are just beginning to discover their own sexuality, making them vulnerable to the projections of male desire. At the same time, there is a stark contrast in how adult women, especially those who are confident in their own bodies and experiences, are often viewed. Once a woman has experienced sex or expressed her sexual autonomy, she is frequently seen as damaged or undesirable in the eyes of many men. This is ingrained in a patriarchal idea that women lose their value once they have lost their seal, and no longer are considered pure or untouched. This concept feeds into a narrative where a woman's worth is measured by her youth, innocence, vulnerability, and virginity, and as women age or become aware of their bodies and their desires, they lose their sense of appeal and become rotten. The way society is shaped, therefore, perpetuates this phenomenon due to the influence of patriarchy, misogyny, and the stigma surrounding sexual autonomy. These cultural forces normalize harmful behaviors, including the objectification of women, the sexualization of young girls, and acceptance of pedophilia, harassment, and rape. The society framework enables a systemic dehumanization of women, particularly through the lens of sexual control and exploitation of the male gaze. In the 1997 film directed by Adrian Lyne and based on Vladimir Nabokov's novel Lolita, the narrator, Humpert, a middle-aged man, describes his pedophilic obsession with a 12-year-old girl named Dolores Hayes, whom he nicknames Lolita. He becomes infatuated with her and forces her into a romantic relationship, violating her to take part in his sexual fantasies that manipulate him and the public's perception of her character. The way in which he describes events by his desires and perceptions naturalizes the way in which his pedophilic behavior is heinous and affecting in Lolita, in a way that manipulates himself through the narrative and the public that consumes it. In seeing Lolita as an object of purity to be corrupted, he not only robs her of her agency, but twists the concept of innocence itself. In one of his first encounters with Lolita, he describes her as said, "She, Lolita, was all rose and honey, dressed in her brightest gingham with a pattern of little red apples. Her arms and legs were of a deep golden brown, with scratches like tiny dotted lines of coagulated rubies, and the ribbed cuffs of her white socks were turned down at the remembered level, and because of her childish gait, or because they had memorized her as always wearing heelless shoes, her saddle Oxfords looked somehow too large and too high-heeled for her." One of his first impressions of her demonstrates her character, a child, an innocent prepubescent girl aged 12 who finds joy in ribbons, dresses, and dolls, curing herself with scratches from her little adventures in the yard whenever she plays. The idea of Humpert using his power over Lolita in wishes of pleasing and quenching his need to be the first to possess her sexually, exploring her innocence and youth, shows how he views his act as something intimate and special, even though in reality he is perpetuating a cycle of violence and control. In his mind, he alone has the right to define Lolita's body, to be the one who claims her innocence, and to hold the power over her sexual autonomy. Society and media seem to validate the idea that Lolita's sexualization is not only inevitable but also something she desires. This portrayal undermines the very concept of her being an innocent, vulnerable child, instead turning her into a sexually active agent, an interpretation that disregards the lack of cohesion and emotional manipulation by Humphrey. The film and other adaptations sometimes emphasize the physical attractiveness of the character of Lolita, minimizing her youth and the trauma of her exploitation, reinforcing the idea that young girls are responsible for their own victimization, or worse, that they seek out such attention. It speaks to a larger cultural tendency to blame victims for their abuse they endure, particularly when it comes to young women and girls. When Humphrey learns that Lolita is pregnant by another man, his reaction is one of bitter resentment and disgust. Throughout the film, he views her as his possession, an object to be molded according to his desires. The news that she has moved on and engaged sexually with someone else shatters his illusion of control. Humphrey's reaction to Lolita's pregnancy reflects a common phenomenon seen in cases of abusive relationships, where the abuser feels entitled to the victim's body and any outside sexual involvement is seen as a violation of their ownership. Lolita's pregnancy and her involvement with another man prompts Humphrey to see her as rotten, ruined, and no longer the pure, innocent girl he once desired. He feels betrayed, not because of concern for her well-being, but because he perceives her as being used and discarded, no longer fitting the image of innocence he had projected onto her. His feelings of disgust are not for the harm done to her, but for the loss of control. Humphrey's transformation into a jealous and possessive figure underscores the fundamentally abusive nature of their relationship, and his desperation to grasp onto old memories of young, controllable Lolita display on his mind. Therefore, the trope and stereotypes surrounding the depiction of young women and girls as sexual figures highlight the underlying societal issues, including the normalization of pedophilia, rape, misogyny, and patriarchy present to this day. The romanization present in today's society proves how the influence of such dilemma became profoundly rooted in its views. Apps like Tumblr and Pinterest, designed for young girls to share pictures and fragments of text they consider aesthetic, that is, their perception of beauty, are filled with scenes from the 1997 film, their aspirations to be and to become Lolita, an innocent yet sexualized version of a young girl in hopes of receiving male validation. As sung by the artist Mitski in her song First Love, Late Spring, "And I was so young when I behaved 25. Yet now I find I've grown into a tall child." She represents her needs as an adolescent to sexualize herself and her perceptions of sexual identity in return of men liking her, losing her sense of self and harming her trajectory in identifying and discovering herself in her body, to fit herself into society's needs and expectations. This scenario is also persistent with grown women, who feel the need to infantilize themselves while still being sexual in some way, with the intent of being desired and wanted. In social media apps such as TikTok and Instagram, adolescents dress themselves in revealing clothing, while presenting sexual mannerisms in return of compliments and reactions by men, while grown women dress themselves in childlike clothing while speaking in high-tuned voices to receive compliments and messages from men, hoping to see more of their content. Content creators, in hopes of increasing their views, exploit their young kids for videos, which are saved, liked, and shared by middle-aged men, fascinated by their youth, purity, and sexual vulnerability, even if they have yet not discovered what the word sex even means or learned to say mama.
The caretaker Black women. The trope of the Black woman as a caretaker, specifically in roles such as maids or slaves, is a deeply ingrained stereotype in media and culture that reduces Black women to subservient roles centered around serving others. This stereotype represents them as loyal, nurturing, and self-sacrificing figures whose primary purpose is to care for white families, often without regard for their own well-being or agency. It stems from a distorted idealization of the historical reality of enslaved Black women and domestic workers, erasing the trauma and systemic oppression they face while glorifying their service. While these portrayals may seem to emphasize qualities like strength or kindness, they are ultimately harmful as they perpetuate the notion that Black women exist solely to provide labor and emotional support to others, dehumanizing them and denying their complexity. This trope is rooted in the history of slavery and racial segregation, where Black women were forced into roles as enslaved caretakers or domestic workers under conditions of severe exploitation. This image was a deliberate tool of white supremacy designed to justify slavery and later systemic racism by portraying Black women as inherently suited for subservient roles and happy to perform them. In reality, these women endured extreme physical, emotional, and psychological abuse, and their labor was extracted under coercion and violence. The idealized depiction erases this history, reframing exploitations as a voluntary care and distorting the historical truth of these women's experiences. The impacts of this trope are significant and enduring. It reinforces the devaluation of Black women's lives and labor, perpetuating the idea that their worth is tied to their service to others. This stereotype influences societal attitudes, leading to the expectation that Black women should always prioritize others' needs over their own, whether in the workplace, personal relationships, or broader societal roles. It also contributes to systemic inequities, as Black women are disproportionately represented in underpaid caregiving professions, reflecting the lingering associations between their identity and servitude. Furthermore, the trope denies Black women the space to exist as fully autonomous individuals with their own dreams, desires, and vulnerabilities, instead confining them to a narrow and oppressive narrative. Challenging this stereotype requires critical examinations of its roots and active efforts to represent Black women in the diverse and empowered ways that honor their humanity and reject historical dehumanization. The career of Brazilian actress Du Moraes exemplifies the impacts of structural racism and the stereotype of the Black woman as a servant in audiovisual media. Du was consistently casting roles as domestic workers or slaves from the colonial era, with little opportunity to portray diverse or complex characters. This limitation reinforces the racist view that Black women are destined to occupy subordinate positions, both in fiction and society. In addition to the underestimation of the actress' talents, this lack of diversity in the roles offered contributes to the perpetuation of stereotypes that dehumanize Black women. Du Moraes' career reflects the urgency of breaking these narratives and building a more inclusive and representative audiovisual industry.
The powerful white man in media. In media, one of the most enduring and pervasive stereotypes is that of the powerful white man. This trope often features a character who is wealthy, influential, and in control, typically occupying positions of authority in politics, business, or other spheres of society. The powerful white man is often portrayed as a hero, a leader, or a symbol of success, someone who is meant to be admired, followed, and revered. His strength, intelligence, and charisma are presented as the qualities that have led him to greatness. This image is so entrenched that it frequently goes unquestioned, acting as a societal ideal to which others are expected to aspire. At the core of this stereotype is the idea that power is synonymous with whiteness and masculinity. Historically, white men have occupied the highest social, political, and economic positions, and this has shaped the cultural narrative surrounding authority and leadership. In many Western societies, power is seen as inherently belonging to white men, often framed as the natural order. These historical realities, shaped by centuries of colonialism, patriarchy, and the enslavement of marginalized people, have cemented the idea that white men are best suited to hold power, making their dominance seem almost preordinated. The notion of power as something inherently white and masculine is reinforced over generations, with other groups, particularly people of color and women, diminished to subordinate roles in both real-world hierarchies and media portrayals. The powerful white man trope reinforces this by casting as the ideal, not just as the man, but as a superior man. His success is rarely questioned, and his failings, if they are noticed at all, are often excused or downplayed. Patriarchy and racial hierarchy intersect in this portrayal, making the powerful white man the default figure of authority and influence in most Western narratives. Moreover, media often presents this trope without critique, further embedding the notion that the powerful white man is deserving of his status. His rise to power is typically framed as a result of his intelligence, hard work, and innate charisma, with little or no mention of the systemic privileges that have aided his ascent. This portrayal, while seemingly celebrating individual achievement, actually obscures the role that privilege, wealth, and status play in maintaining power. This idea is particularly insidious because it presents the powerful white man as the epitome of success, the figure to whom everyone else must defer. But when the same figure is challenged, when women, people of color, or anyone outside of this idealized vision of power question his authority, there is often a backlash. This is because the notion of his natural right to power is so deeply ingrained in our cultural psyche that it is difficult for many to imagine an alternative. This entitlement to power is not only accepted, but is also expected, and any deviation from it is often met with resistance or outright hostility. When crimes are committed by powerful white men, whether it be sexual assault, harassment, or even murder, there is often an underlying assumption that their status and success somehow mitigate their responsibility. This manifests in many ways, from lenient sentences to public disbelief in the accusations made against them. The idea is that these men, due to their power and influence, are somehow entitled to act without facing the same consequences as others, whether it's a celebrity accused of assault, a politician engaged in corrupt practices, or a businessman exploiting workers. The powerful white man often seems shielded from the repercussions of his actions. This sense of entitlement is so deeply rooted that even when these men are exposed for their wrongdoings, their power and status allow them to escape without facing the same scrutiny or punishments as others would. In The Wolf of Wall Street, 2013 movie directed by Martin Scorsese, Jordan Belfort's journey through the world of high finance is a study of uncontrolled greed and privilege. From the very beginning, Belfort is presented as a man who uses his charm and business savvy to climb to the top of Wall Street, ultimately engaging in massive fraud, money laundering, and corruption. However, the film's most chilling moments come when the Belfort's actions show how he believes he is entitled to exploit and abuse those around him with little to no consequences. In the movie, women are shown as mere trophies, things to be acquired and discarded without thought for their well-being. A specific example is when he arranges an orgy on his yacht, where his wealthy, powerful position allows him to view these women not as people, but as commodities to satisfy his desires which he feels entitled to. This scene exemplifies how he is disconnected from any notion of empathy or respect for others, particularly women, who are objectified and dehumanized. His entitlement comes from his belief that because he is a successful white man, his desires should be always met, no matter the cost of others. Another key moment occurs when Belfort's manipulative behavior leads to the near destruction of his own family. The scene where he aggressively forces his wife, Naomi, into staying with him despite his affairs is a powerful portrayal of his belief that he can dominate every aspect of his life, including his relationships. When she begins to stand up for herself, his anger erupts, highlighting how his power allows him to dismiss her autonomy. The power imbalance between them is stark. He can use her, cheat on her, and control her because he is the one who holds all the wealth and influence. Perhaps one of the most blatant depictions of Belfort's entitlements come during the speech at the sales seminar. In this moment, his bravado and grandiosity are on full display. He commands a room of employees with a mix of aggression and charm, willing them to follow his unethical business practices. He treats his subordinates with disdain, humbling them to remind them that they exist to serve his bottom line. The irony of this scene lies in how his success is built on the suffering and manipulation of others, yet he remains blind to this fact. He feels entitled to profit from their hardship. Also portrayed in American Psycho, 2000's movie directed by Mary Herron, Patrick Bateman is a character whose privileged status and wealth give him a godlike sense of power. He is a successful investment banker in 80s Manhattan, living a life of excess and indulgence. The film is a chilling portrayal of how Bateman uses his wealth and status to justify horrific actions, including sexual assault, murder, and torture, becoming a serial killer, all while maintaining a veneer of charm and politeness. The movie is a satire of capitalism, consumerism, and the patriarchal structures that reinforce the superiority of white men like Bateman. In the movie, he feels free in sharing his violent thoughts, murders, and rapes in public, to which most people react by laughing along or ignoring his commentary, demonstrating the power he holds in his hand, protecting him from any confrontation or consequence. One of the most infamous and disturbing scenes in the movie occurs when Bateman sleeps with two women who work in sex labor in a hotel. In a scene that is not only grotesque but emblematic of his complete disregard for the sanctity of life, this murder is not about self-defense, nor is it about rage. It is a cold, calculated act of power. Bateman's ability to murder without remorse highlights his sense of invulnerability. He believes that, as a wealthy white man, he is above reproach and immune to punishment. In this world, his desires, no matter how twisted, are his to act upon without consequence. Bateman's lack of guilt or empathy is also evident when he kills his business associate, Paul Allen, in a cold and calculated manner. Bateman's murder of Allen, a man who is in equal terms of wealth and status, reveals that his sense of power is not just about dominance over women, but also over anyone who might challenge him. This act of violence is an assertion to his belief that no one is truly his equal. He is the ultimate authority of his world. What makes this scene even more disturbing is the nonchalance in which Bateman commits the murder, casually continuing his life without showing any remorse. In both The Wolf of Wall Street and American Psycho, the protagonists engage in illegal, immoral, and abusive actions with a sense of entitlement and impunity. Their actions are not mere transgressions. They are crimes that reflect deep-seated societal issues that grant them power and privilege based on their race and gender. The central theme that connects both of the characters is their belief that they can do whatever they wish without consequences. Jordan Belfort's illicit behavior, from defrauding investors to exploiting women, is never truly challenged by society. Even when he faces illegal action, the film suggests that his ultimate punishment is nothing compared to the wealth and privilege he still retains. His sentence is a slap on the wrist, a reminder that those with power, especially powerful white men, can often avoid the impacts of their actions. In American Psycho, Bateman's actions go largely unpunished as well. The film leaves ambiguity surrounding the reality of his murders, as the narrative is constructed through Bateman's unreliable perspective. This uncertainty underscores the idea that, even if his crimes are not real, the belief in his power to act without consequence is deeply ingrained. In today's society, not much has changed. Both protagonists continue to be idolized by male viewers who overlook the critical messages this film is intended to convey. In particular, American Psycho, a reflection and caricature designed to critique the powerful white man, has been misinterpreted by some as aspirational, with viewers imagining themselves in the protagonist's role and even aspiring to emulate him, rather than recognizing the satire and condemnation at the heart of the story. Studies from Harvard suggest that this may only worsen, as 25% of young men aged 18 to 24 consider themselves to be conservative, 5 points higher than their elders aged 25 to 30 in 2024.
The rebel, but still submissive Asian girl. The rebel Asian girls are typically represented in Western media as young women that break some cultural norms. In the movies and series, these girls exhibit a questioning attitude, behavior, and choice of style, creating an image of deviation from the traditional expectations from female behavior in Asia, but still maintain certain elements of submissiveness and docility, which reflects a distorted view of Asian women. Opposing the common stereotype that determines the Asian woman's physical appearance and behavior, described as polite, modest, and physically delicate, the rebel Asian women are represented as bold in their look and conduct. Characterized by the use of the leather jacket, color hair strands, and the practice of martial arts, it is therefore seen as a form of subversion of the ideal of perfection and modesty with which these women are traditionally associated. However, this rebellion is superficial because since this stereotype is often shaped to please a Western audience, especially male, who fetishize this behavior which is in some way eccentric or exotic. This representation is not genuine and often lacks depth. Female characters who fit this stereotype may be described as defiant, but when interacting with male characters, they often appear submissive and willing to please them. This behavior is a reflection of a cultural stereotype that diminishes Asian women, suggesting that they can only be rebellious on a superficial level and under a structure that forces them to submit to male authority. In other words, rebellion is restricted to an external appearance, but the true power of decision-making and autonomy are in the control of the white man. This problematic dynamic reflects the way Western media often manipulates representations of Asian women to please male audiences rather than presenting an authentic representation of these women, limiting their portrayal, preventing them from having more complex, deeper, and varied roles in narratives. The stereotype of Asian women works as a fetishization tool that prevents them to express their individuality and authenticity, because at the same time that the character can be seen as a different and eccentric, she still submits to behavioral expectations to please men. This type of representation reduces Asian women to an object of desire, fooling sexual fantasies, and disregarding the complexity of their identity. This type of trope is therefore a reflection of the power and gender dynamics that continues to be problematic in the representation of women in many Western cultures. One example of this problematic is Knives Chow in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Is portrayed as a quirky and slightly obsessive teenager breaking away from the mold of the obedient and passive Asian girlfriend. Her rebellion is evident when she changes her appearance and behavior because of Scott Pilgrim and in her determination to pursue him even after being rejected, demonstrating an almost aggressive persistence. However, this apparent independence is superficial, as Knives' entire arc revolves around her devotion to Scott and her quest for his validation. Her persistence is not shown as an act of autonomy, but rather as a charming and youthful trait to emphasize their infatuation with him. As a result, her rebellion is framed as something that reinforces her role as her lover-struck role subordinate to Scott's desires and decisions, minimizing any sense of personal growth or agency. This simplifies how her characterization is constructed to serve the male protagonist's narratives rather than developing Knives as an independent character. Stereotypes and tropes in media both influence and are influenced by society, reflecting cultural, historical, and social characteristics. They often mirror societal beliefs drawing from norms, values, and historical biases. While they can perpetuate outdated views rooted in inequality, they also have the power to challenge these ideas when used thoughtfully. Understanding their role will help us create stories that embrace diversity and reflect the complexity of society. This video is part of a media study class project taught by Ms. Ana Rita. It was created by Mariana Marques and Sofia Mora from class G11. Credits for imagery and sound are listed in the description. I hope you enjoyed watching and thank you for your time and attention.